My next guest was named one of Time's 30 most influential people on the internet and ranked number 11 on Fortune's World's Greatest Leaders list. But even if you don't know DeRay McKesson by name, you'll likely know him by his vest. His blue Patagonia has been like a modern-day Forrest Gump, captured in photos and videos of protests across the country, not to mention on the campaign trail during McKesson's run for Baltimore mayor. He's worn it to the Oscars, Facebook headquarters, an event with President Barack Obama. It even has its own Twitter account. But for McKesson, the vest is much more than a piece of clothing. It's a reminder of where his activism began when he left a six-figure job at the Minneapolis school system, headed off to Ferguson, Missouri, marching for 400 days through a bitterly cold winter to protest the police shooting of unarmed 18-year-old Michael Braude. His new book is On the Other Side of Freedom, The Case for Hope. It's a collection of essays reflecting on the Black Lives Matter movement since then, his childhood in Baltimore, systems of repression across the U.S., and how this generation could change it all. DeRay McKesson is also the host of the Pod Save the People podcast, part of Campaign Zero. It's an organization working to end police violence. He joins me now. DeRay, it's good to see you again.
It's so good to see you.
Is that really the only vest? Raise your right hand.
Only vest. You know, I get them as gifts now because people think I have this affinity for vests.
But that is it?
This is it. It's like patched up, you know, it's falling apart. But
so you're lying on the couch late at night in Minneapolis, you say in your book. You're watching television, you're reading Twitter feeds, watching about Ferguson. What caused the epiphany that it caused you to say, I'm going to drop that, I'm going to just go be part of that thing?
You know, I spent my career working in education. I taught sixth grade math, opened up an after-school center, trained and hired teachers. And when I saw the news about Mike Braude being killed, he was a teenager. And I was like, the least I can do is just go see for myself. You know, so I was like, I'm just going to go for the weekend and try and see. And then I got tear gas on the second night I was in St. Louis. And I was like, I'll do whatever I can to
Is that what radicalized you, the tear gas? Because you say you were radicalized in Ferguson.
It was like, that was a thing that was like, this is different. And I've been told that like that part of American history was behind us. And then I was living it, and I was like, oh, this is wild.
So when you say it was the Michael Braude teenage, was it because you spent your life working with kids and
Absolutely.
That was a kid?
Yeah, it was
and
like
that's what drew you?
Yeah, and like this idea that you got to be alive to learn, that I'm working so hard to make sure kids have access, but if they get shot in the street by a police officer, the access stuff doesn't even matter.
So that's when Black Lives Matter took center stage in America. I mean, obviously started earlier in the Trayvon Martin situation. Where are we 5 years later? Would you say 4 after Ferguson, 5 after Trayvon? Where's Black Lives Matter and what progress has it made?
You know, I think about the movement as an expansive space in the same way the civil rights movement was a big space. A lot of organizations, a lot of people. I think that 4 years after the initial protests in St. Louis is that what we've seen is that the awareness is at an all-time high. We're talking about police violence and mass incarceration. We're talking about trans rights. We're talking about identity in ways that we've never talked about in public before. The question is, how do we translate that awareness into change, right? So I think that the answer, you know, remember that civil rights movement was a decade-long worth of activism. So they had a wave of awareness too that like really got to some structural things. So I think that with police departments, some of it will be local. There are 18,000 police departments. There's a lot of change happening at the local level across the country. And then I'm hopeful too that we start to think about how we shift resources at the national level so that we get to equity.
Well, speaking of national, your subtitle of your book is The Case for Hope, and I hope there is a case for hope. But you've got a president of the United States who doesn't talk about police violence against unarmed black men and women, but does rail against successful black men protesting peacefully on a football field. So how does that not destroy whatever hope's in your body?
Yeah, you know, he's doing so much damage. You know, he actually even attacks like the FBI in ways that, like, if I said, you know, the FBI already visited my house. If I said the stuff that he says about the FBI, it'd be like, I hate law enforcement. He does it, and people are like, it's another day. You know, with Colin, you think about Colin's saying something really simple. Colin's saying racism is alive and present, and that it's in the criminal justice system, policing, and society at large. We do see this president continuing to just attack black people because he's relying on the same nostalgic messaging of Jim Crow that we've already survived once. And like we see it time and time again. The good thing is that some of the changes that we want around mass incarceration and police are locally controlled, so the state and the local level, and I'm excited about that.
But it seems, I think it's a fair statement to say, I'm not trying to destroy your hope, I'd like to take some of your hope, but long before you were born, it appears, we were saying we're about to have that national conversation about race. White people are about to have this national conversation. I'm still waiting. We have little moments here and there. We've had some in Boston, we've had some nationally. If we can't even talk about it, how can we fix it?
Well, I think that that's what the internet has allowed us to do, and that wasn't around the same way 30, 40 years ago, is that people can have those conversations not mediated by a TV show, a radio show, or like any validated media source. Like, we can actually come together and force these conversations. I think Twitter is a great example. You think about all of the work around Me Too, you think about these things that literally would not have happened if not for the internet. So I have a lot of hope in that. I think that, like, you know, you even think about the protests. Without Twitter, we wouldn't have been recognized in the same way.
You've been critical of traditional media too, and while you're praising another kind of media, social media, is that because there's no filter, and you think the filter that those of us in the media have used has unfairly portrayed?
Yeah, I think that, you know, the reality is that traditional media is just much better today than they were 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we said something about the police, and traditional media just carried the police narrative as fact. Now, the traditional media is like asking the tough questions too. They weren't doing that 4 years ago. If anything, my frustration with the traditional media is now about like free speech. This idea that like everybody just deserves a platform is what I'd say is that, like, who's not on your show or any of the people who shot up the Gazette in Annapolis, Maryland, like, you're not. The traditional media understands that putting those people on TV is actually a dangerous thing.
So is David Remnick at the New Yorker right to invite and then cancel Steve Bannon?
Because never should have been invited.
Never should have been invited. So it's better that we not hear from him and he be challenged than it's better that he not be heard from at all than challenged for his
Would
views.
you invite the people who believe that we should shoot the media because they are bad for democracy? Would you invite them on your show?
No, I would not.
Yeah, then, like, when I think about the white supremacists, they think that I shouldn't exist, and I don't think they deserve a platform either.
Campaign Zero, what is it?
Yeah, so a 10-point plan to think about how we end police violence. So we created the first public database of police union contracts, use of force policies.
By the way, that graphic people are looking at are the different pieces people can click on the site to learn a little bit about
it.
And
the two biggest that we launched on were police union contracts and use of force policies, trying to unearth the things that people didn't know. So you think about in California, there's a law that literally says that any investigation of an officer that lasts more than a year can never result in discipline, regardless of the outcome. That just doesn't make sense. And there are a lot of those things all across the country. So we wanted to shed light on them to empower activists and organizers to do work.
When you say activists and organizers, do non-usual suspects go there, or do you know?
A ton. I'm always surprised.
Out of curiosity, or because their mind has been cracked open a little by what's happening in the world around them?
I think both. I think some people are like, what are the things I don't know? Because what's interesting about police violence is that it's happening all over the country, right? People think it's not their issue until it's in their backyard. So we find the most unlikely people who want to be a part of our data projects, who are trying to help us out, who are trying to help us think about things differently. And I'm always surprised. I'm less interested in what you identify as and more interested in the work you do.
You know, speaking of interested, one of the things I would think I was most interested in your book, and Marjorie Egan on the radio said the same thing today, was the stuff about you that I didn't know. You talk about your mother in incredibly, I thought, raw and honest ways. And you talk about yourself coming out, not out of the closet, but out of the quiet. I never heard the term before. What does that mean?
Yeah, like, just because you didn't know doesn't mean that I was hiding, right? And like, you know, I remember having the conversation with my dad, and I called him about a relationship issue in college, and then like midway through the conversation, it's a guy, like that's like, it just comes up, and he sort of pauses for a second, and it just keeps on rolling. Like, that was the extent of the conversation, and it was perfect. But I wanted to talk about this notion that we show up as full people in every room that we are, so there's no way for me to write a book about any of the justice issues without being really candid about how I show up in spaces.
And I have 30 seconds left. What are you hoping that, again, the non-usual suspects, I'm not concerned about people who are on board, what do you hope they take out of away from On the Other Side of Freedom?
I hope they read it and they're like, wow, I just didn't know that. And I hope that it also pushes them to be introspective about their own lives and think about like where they can be in the fight, because, you know, there's a lot of work to be done.
Great. It's a pleasure to see you.
Great
Thanks
to
so much
see
for
you.
your time. Good luck with the book and
Thank
with
you.
your work, obviously. The book, again, is On the Other Side of Freedom, The Case for Hope.